This time, I would like to talk about the increasing number of cases where foreigners are unable to leave China. For a long time now, China has been considered quite a dangerous country, especially compared to the image most Japanese people have. Those familiar with the situation in China have been raising warnings, but in Japan, the major media outlets don't seem to cover this topic very much. As a result, the general perception may be that China or Hong Kong could be considered potential destinations for overseas travel. However, in the US, they are already issuing warnings to their citizens, advising them not to go to China. The reason for this is that China is known for practicing private law enforcement, meaning, in simple terms, that you can be detained based on the whims of the Communist Party. They are warning their citizens not to go to China because of the risk that they could be detained without clear reasons. That being said, there are still some Americans, as well as people from other countries, who, for various reasons, continue to travel to China. And now, as you might expect, there are increasing reports of Americans being unable to leave China. This doesn't mean they're being physically detained, but rather that they are being stopped at the airport and not allowed to return home. I don't think this information is being widely shared in Japan, but it's not just limited to Americans, many others are facing similar situations. Some people might think these are cases where individuals have been detained on suspicion of espionage, but that's not always the case. The risk here is different from the previously known ones, so I want to delve deeper into that. First, please take a look at this. According to English-language articles, the people who are being banned from leaving the country are primarily those who went to China on business. There is an increase in exit bans on foreign executives and business people. If you think about it, Japanese people who have been detained in China were also mostly there for business. I haven't heard of tourists or students being detained, though there might be some cases. But primarily, those who are being banned from leaving are business people. This is based on an analysis of a database from China's highest court, the Supreme People's Court. The analysis, conducted by an English-language organization, shows that between 2016 and 2022, the number of cases mentioning exit bans increased eightfold, with most of them being related to civil matters. Espionage is a criminal issue, but the majority of these cases are civil ones. While Japan hears about Chinese authorities detaining people on espionage charges without clearly defining what constitutes espionage, the reality is that most of the cases involve foreigners being unable to leave due to civil lawsuits. This is a risk that many Japanese people probably aren't aware of. In other words, it's not necessarily the government that is detaining people. It's more often conflicts between individuals or companies within China. If a dispute arises with a Chinese individual or company, and they file a lawsuit, the foreigner might not be allowed to leave the country. A significant number of people are facing this issue. There is data from 1995 to 2019, which, although a bit outdated, reveals that 29 Americans and 44 Canadians were banned from leaving China during that time. In total, 128 foreigners were unable to leave the country. This shows that it's not just Americans and Canadians, many other foreigners also face this issue. By the way, it's not just foreigners who are subject to exit bans, Chinese citizens themselves can also be prohibited from leaving. The number of such cases is said to be in the tens of thousands. And since these figures come from the court's database, there are likely many more unreported cases in China. The actual number is probably much higher. This situation is believed to be influenced by the policies of the Xi Jinping administration. Since 2018, 5 new laws related to exit bans have been enacted, and at least 10 existing laws have been amended to make exit bans possible. This means that, while there was no legal basis for exit bans before, they have increased significantly under Xi Jinping's leadership. If you search for information in English, you can find many websites offering advice on what to do if you find yourself banned from leaving China. The first piece of advice is to avoid engaging in illegal activities. However, in China, what constitutes an illegal activity is often determined by the Communist Party. Even if you didn't intend to break any laws, if the party decides that what you did is illegal, then it becomes illegal. For example, if they decide that a photo you took is a state secret, that's enough to make it illegal. Even if you argue that it wasn't that kind of photo, it won't matter. Although most exit bans are related to civil matters, you also have to be cautious of criminal matters, as many Japanese people have been detained on criminal charges. This is something to keep in mind, though in my opinion, there's not much you can do to avoid it. Once you've been targeted by the Communist Party, there's little you can do. Another piece of advice for avoiding exit bans is to avoid getting into conflicts with Chinese individuals, especially with people connected to the government. In China, people with power hold significant influence, and if you catch the attention of those people, you could be in serious trouble. In essence, China is a society where people with influence and power can make things difficult for others. To expand on this, if you have been flagged by the Chinese government, it's best not to go to China in the first place. This includes people like me who say things on the internet that might be unfavorable to the Communist Party. Even if you're just an ordinary person blogging or making statements like Taiwan is an independent country, going to China could be dangerous. For example, if a company sends one of its employees to work in China, and that employee has made political statements in the past, such as supporting Taiwan's independence, they could face risks once they're in China. Japanese companies need to take this into consideration and be careful about sending employees to China in such a situation. Nowadays, sending employees to China on rotation is becoming riskier. Another important piece of advice is that if you're involved in a dispute with a Chinese person, it's best not to go to China, and if you're already there, it's better to return home as soon as possible. The same applies if you owe any debts, whether personal or business related, because you could be sued, which could result in an exit ban. In conclusion, no matter how careful you are, once you enter China, there is always a risk of facing an exit ban. While most cases are civil, criminal charges still pose a significant risk, especially when dealing with powerful figures in China. And as China's economy continues to weaken, there will likely be more lawsuits as a means of applying pressure to extract payments. Ultimately, traveling to China has become an increasingly risky endeavor. Even in civil disputes, there are cases where lawsuits are used to prevent foreigners from leaving the country until a payment is made. As this trend continues, it's important to weigh these risks carefully before deciding to go to China.